The documentary The Six was released to Canadian audiences this week, and it's about the 6 surviving Chinese passengers of the Titanic. If you're thinking, which Chinese passengers of the Titanic? You're not alone. The sinking of the Titanic is the single most well-known, documented, and researched shipwreck in the world. Historians have traced the movements of every known passenger, and that's before Leo and Kate signed on to star in the movie. And yet, fans of Who Do You Think You Are will thoroughly enjoy this show, following an international team of researchers as they unravel the riddle of these forgotten men. This show is like my fantasy of what I'd like to do as a researcher. Fly around the world to archives, find clues, tap experts and translators, ask every question that comes up, and bust that brick wall. I sat down with one of the researchers. Meet Grant Dinh. Grant Dinh has conducted genealogical research for over 35 years and currently serves on the board of the California Genealogical Society and consults on genealogical and nonprofit projects. He served on the staff of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation for 8 years and currently volunteers there to maintain the Immigrant Voices website with over 220 stories of West Coast immigrants from throughout the world. His research has taken him throughout California, China, and Japan to research his and his family's journeys. Grant holds a certificate in genealogical research from Boston University, an MA in public policy analysis from Claremont Graduate University, and a BA in sociology with an emphasis on urban studies from Yale University, and has traveled throughout the US, China, and Japan for his research. He has close to 40 years of experience in the Bay Area nonprofit sector and lives with his family in Oakland, California. I first met Grant in January 2020 when he presented a talk on Chinese American genealogy, and I later followed up with him on his work. Hey. Hi, Grant.
Hi, Linda.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, please tell me about yourself and how you got into genealogy.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Oakland. I went to school back east on the in Connecticut, and then worked in Oberlin, Ohio for a while as an Asian American counselor at Oberlin College, and then came back to where I've been most of my life. And I first got started, I think, thinking about genealogy or family history when my mom would tell us about where she lived in the Sacramento River Delta in California. It was in the Chinatown, in a small town, and she told me about going to a segregated school, and I was shocked at that. I thought it only happened to Blacks in the South. And so later on, I learned more about the so-called Oriental schools in the central part of California. And kind of thought about that, but really got interested when like a second cousin once removed showed me a family tree at I think it was probably a wedding reception, and pulled out this enormous tree and said, "Oh, we're in the 36th generation of gongs," because I'm really a gong, and Din's a paper name many times over, and showed me this tree, and I was just fascinated by how much they could trace, and didn't think about it for a while, but later on started doing research. Went to the National Archives in San Bruno, found my grandparents' Angel Island files and things like that. And it's always that kind of sparked an interest. And then later on, when I got a job at the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, helping on fundraising, I really got interested in helping other people find their histories, because we had a immigrant heritage wall, and people could honor their family members who immigrated, especially those who came through Angel Island, but we also have more recent immigrants on there. And so families would say, "Oh, I don't know when my grandmother came through, or if she came through, can you help me find that?" And so I'd go to the National Archives and started digging around. And San Bruno is not too far from San Francisco, so I just found I really had a love for that, and really enjoy helping families learn more about their own histories.
It's so incredible of you, Grant, to spend your time, not only when I'm hearing paid, but also your volunteer time, I'm thinking, to help families find their family.
Yeah, it's great fun. It's very rewarding. People are just always amazed. Oh, I didn't know grandma did this, or grandpa had to, make these lies up, things like that.
Oh, I could ask you so much about that.
Yeah.
So Grant, how did you hear about the Six, a documentary project?
Sure. I was talking to Marissa Louis Lee one day, a fantastic genealogist who has worked at the National Archives. And she said she was approached by these filmmakers who were working on a film about the Chinese who were survived the Titanic. And of course, just like everyone else, I didn't know that any Chinese had survived the Titanic. But she said she was expecting her second child and wouldn't be able to take it on. So was I interested? And said, of course. And so I talked to some of the filmmakers and said, yeah, sign me up. And started learning as much as I could just from all the research their team had already done.
Please describe for us what you did on this project, and please go into detail.
Sure. A lot of the movie is about the search for the six. There were 8 Chinese who got on the Titanic in Southampton, England, and 6 the 8 showed up on the manifest, ship manifest, going out, and 6 showed up arriving on the Carpathia, the rescue ship, arriving in New York. And most of the 6 were the details were different. And so what the charge was for us researchers in London, New York, Bay Area, and especially China, where they had a whole team, was to try to find any descendants that they could try to dig up some details about. And the person who the living person that we knew of for sure, but we wanted to connect to the Titanic, was named Tom Fong. And if you see the trailer or the film, you'll see a man who is about 60 years old. And you say, how can he be 60 and have a father who was on the Titanic, which crashed in 1912? Well, his father had him relatively late in life because of the Exclusion Acts. He couldn't go to China and get married, and finally did when he was in his 50s or 60s. And so Tom had been told by a relative, oh, your dad was on the Titanic. And his dad had died and never told him anything about not only that, but nothing about his past. So our charge was to try to find information similar or any information about any of the 6 people. So we had people in England digging up details there. We had people in New York, and all of us were trying to find things. There's a man named Ling He, and the researchers had found 2 kind of documents that described him working on ships. All these men were working for the White Star Line as seamen. They were working in the boiler room, shoveling coal into the ships to power them. And so they were not working on the Titanic, but they were on their way to New York to work for other ships that were like fruit boats that transported fruit from the Caribbean back and forth to New York and things like that. So we were trying to find, did they continue on these other ships? Where did they live? Do we know anything about their children, especially, so we can try to find that out and things like that. So it was a challenging but exciting task.
How long did you work on this project?
It was really the bulk of it was less than a year. They wanted to get things done. I think back then it was by early 2019, if I remember right. I think I started working on 2018, and so we had maybe about 6 months to try to get as much as we could. Meanwhile, in China, they were trying to track down families of some of the men, and that was fascinating as they did that work, and they discovered some really interesting things. And
So uh, you've seen the documentary, which
yeah,
I'm hoping everyone will be able to get a chance to see it. But can you share a behind the scenes story with us?
sure. One of the things we were trying to do was, since we weren't actually physically in one place, I know all the things that were going on in China. I think they were in Shanghai. I'm not sure, but or Beijing. But for us researchers, we would anytime we'd find something, we'd post it to we, and everyone would say, "Oh, so and so was on the Aneta, the first ship they went on after they left the Titanic, from this time to this time." Oh, and someone would say, "Oh, I found, uh, let's say, I found Fong Long on this ship on this date, and did anyone else find that?" And so, genealogists a lot of time we're used to working kind of solo. You go in the archive and you just dig and dig and dig. But this is fun because we are all feeding off each other and just sharing our knowledge and saying, "Oh, yeah, let me go look at this archive since I'm in New York," or whatever. Cynthia Lee would do that.
Incredible.
Things like that.
Uh, so this film really highlighted what it's like to work in Chinese genealogy. I personally learned a lot. What discoveries did you make?
Oh, I learned a lot about. I didn't know much about the men who jumped ship. That a lot of them. We're used to looking for documents, right? And so if you ideally in like Chinese American or probably Chinese Canadian, I'm guessing, research, you'll find a document, you'll find a ship manifest, or you find the actual questioning they went through on Angel Island or Seattle or somewhere else. And if you can find that, that's really valuable. But what if there's a missing link in the trail, that the person is filing for citizenship, for example, and says, "Oh, I arrived in New York on this date, but I don't remember what ship." And then there's no documentation around. Well, I learned from the late Judy Young, that there are thousands of Chinese, people from other countries, who were sailors, and they would get to port and they'd be told, especially in the Chinese case, because you couldn't immigrate here, "Oh, you have to stay on the ship." But somehow they get off the ship. And so that's something I learned a lot about, is because some of the men we think ended up in the US that way, perhaps.
It's the entire documentary is fascinating. Honestly, I think it's groundbreaking, and I personally related to it on so many different levels. As a Chinese person, and also a researcher, and even the description of some of the problems, and my head just about fell off the first 10 minutes when the problems were being described, and I was like, yes, that's what it's like. Yes. We start off with, "We don't know their names," and I say, yes.
Right. And they go by 3 different names.
Right. If these things that you and I, now you with your 35 years of experience and me with less, but similarly, the first issues, I feel like, Grant, sometimes we start 10 steps back of other researchers, because we have to figure out what is their name and then go from there.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to go down many different paths to try to find one thing. Or sometimes, though, the government will give us more detail than we ever expected, just because they were trying to keep us out of this country, or our ancestors, and so they would thoroughly document them. But it's always a trade-off, and that's what makes it kind of exciting sometimes.
That's such a good way to put it. Thank you for joining me this morning.
I really appreciate your efforts to give people insights into the world of research for those of us in North America who are researching Chinese immigrants, and how frustrating, but how exciting it can be, and how rewarding. And so I think that you're putting this blog out.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.
The Six is now playing virtually at the Vancouver Film Festival for Canadian audiences until Monday, October 11th, just in time for Thanksgiving. Details for the show, including its release to American audiences on October 16th, are in the links. Thank you for watching.